Okay, so today we're going to be trying to achieve a usable rhythm guitar sound using only three plugins. Now, by free, I mean plugins that either come bundled with your chosen DAW or plugins that you can download online. Now, for those of you who don't know, in this instance, the DAW that I'm using is Logic Pro X, which is unfortunately Mac only. However, pretty much every DAW, both Mac and PC, should come packaged with all the types of plugins that I'll be using in this video. So your typical compressor, noise gate, every DAW should have that. All guitar parts recorded in this video were done so using an Ibanez RG8 with stock pickups, no upgrades at all. And my audio interface is a Line 6 Tone Port UX2. The whole point of this video is just to demonstrate the fact that you really don't need to spend thousands in order to achieve a decent guitar sound. With a little bit of tweaking, you can get a sound that easily rivals any of the high-end amp modelers out there. Granted, it may never rival a £2,000 tube amp, but it's still going to sound pretty good, and it will slot really easily into a mix. Okay, so the very first thing I have in my signal chain is a noise gate. Now, the reason for the noise gate is to remove any unwanted sound from a signal. This is going to be your typical hum, static type sounds. Now, when setting your noise gate, it's important to get the threshold and the release times correct. For the more staccato type riffs, a really quick release is best. However, if you set it too quick, it's going to kill your sustain, so you really need to balance these out correctly. Personally, for me, I find that a less aggressive cutoff point and a longer release time works better. But it is also important to note that these will differ from guitar to pickup because the output of every pickup is different. We will actually end up coming back to this stage later on. In terms of EQ at this stage, all we're going to do is try and take out some of the boxy low-end frequencies. We don't really need these coming into the amp, and realistically all they're going to do is muddy things up. This also gives us an opportunity to push the higher end slightly and boost a bit of our pick attack. We'll get a bit more definition, a bit more clarity, and a bit more overall aggression to the sound. Now you'll see I'm not going crazy with these boosts, it's only 3 or 4 dB each time, that's enough. The reason that I have a compressor before the amp is to try and even out the signal before it even reaches the amp. Also, keep in mind that this is before a distortion pedal. What this allows us to do is send a more even signal into the distortion pedal, giving us a more even output of that as well. We're really not looking to crush the dynamics out of the signal. What we're really looking for is just to tighten it up slightly and also make sure that any kind of open notes we play send the same signal out as a palm mute. Your attack and release times are obviously going to differ to mine because you have different pickups. Different pickups give out a different dynamic response. It is important to note though that if you crush your signal, you won't have the same punchiness in your overall sound. So this is an area where it's worth spending a little bit of extra time tweaking. Obviously I'm rushing through this for the purpose of the video and I already have my levels set, but you get the idea. Quite often in modern metal, the purpose of a distortion pedal is actually to act as a boost pedal. Essentially, all boosting your signal does is give you a higher output into your amp. What this will do is give you an overall tighter sound because it essentially clips off some of your signal. However, I personally like to use a bit of distortion from the pedal and make the amp not work quite as hard. My personal preference for guitar tones is not to have too much distortion anyway. I prefer to pick harder and get an overall more clear sound, so that usually reflects the settings that I have on my distortion pedal. Just an extra note that this would be the first third-party plugin that I have used in this video. This would be the Ignite Amps Tyrant Tube Screamer. It is really great, it's as good as any other plugin that I've ever used for this, and it is completely free. There is absolutely no reason not to go and download this. Inevitably, using a distortion pedal adds extra noise into your signal, so what I do now is use a second noise gate set nowhere near as aggressively as the first, just to cut out that bit of extra signal noise. Realistically, this doesn't really make the hugest difference in the world, but it does help pull that extra little bit of noise back out before it hits your amp, which is always helpful. The amp sim that I've chosen to use is the Ignite Amps Emissary. It gives you loads of different options in terms of the sounds it can produce. How you choose to set the amp is completely up to you. Personally, I like a mid-range kind of bite to my sound, but you might like a more scoop sound, and that's absolutely fine. So however you do this is just completely personal preference. All of the third-party plugins that I have used in this video, I will be providing links to down in the description. The plugins that I've chosen to use in this video aren't the only options out there. There are loads of great ones, and I will provide links to alternatives as well. Now, without this part of the signal path, you'll realise that you have an extremely fizzy sound. That's because you don't have a cab. What we use for a cabinet is something called an impulse response, and what an impulse response is, it's essentially an extremely detailed EQ curve. I will be providing links down below in the description on where to find impulse responses, as well as the plugins that you'll need to load them. In the spirit of doing things for free, the impulse response I've used in this video is one that I downloaded from the forum, and I've also taken the time to credit its creator down in the description. Without being over enthusiastic, this really is where the magic happens when talking about amp modelling. Just for the sake of clarity, the impulse response loader that I'm using is Logic Pro's own Space Designer. However, again, as I mentioned, I will be providing links to ones that you can use. The last thing we're going to do is just use an EQ to notch out some of the resonant frequencies we're not all that keen on, and also give the guitar a high and low pass filter. Taking the time to do this will just ensure that your guitar sits slightly better in the mix than it would have otherwise. Getting rid of the boomy low end ensures that it doesn't compete with the bass and the kick, and getting rid of the fizzy high end ensures that it doesn't compete with the vocals and also overheads. Once I've got all of this done, I usually just like to go back over what plugins I already have in there and tweak them slightly just to make sure that they do fit as well as they can. The noise gates, for example, can often take a second pass just to make sure that you've got your settings exactly correct for you. It's also worth trying to play in a couple of different styles just to make sure that they are correct. Ultimately, I think it's fairly easy to see that you don't need to spend a lot to get good results, and that once you start to understand what you're doing, it's actually quite easy to get the sound you're after. I created the signal chain used in this video in probably less than 10 minutes, so there's no reason that with additional tweaking, you can't get way better results than I have today. If you do like what you saw in this video, it's going to be worth going and hitting the subscribe button and also giving this video a thumbs up. If you have any questions or suggestions on what video you'd like me to do next, just let me know in the comments section or shoot me a message over Facebook. One final time, all the links that you'll need will be in the description. Thanks, guys.